often our episodes start with a little bit of an awkward silence while we wait to see if we are live. And so I'm just vamping until I know for a fact that we are.
We are.
Before I say to you, Hugh, today I thought we might talk about leading through hopelessness.
Oh, through hopelessness. Okay. Okay. Wow. Now that one is a challenge.
Yeah. Right. I mean, part of my thinking about this, because I've been there, I've been in hopelessness. Leadership is this thing of vision. And hopelessness is the thing that happens when it feels like the light is fading on the vision and the vision becomes unclear, uh unbridgeably distant. And so if and when, and I think it happens for all of us, that vision fades to the point where the sofa is more tempting than the helm. Now what?
It's funny. You say these things, and I realize I don't spend a lot of time. I remember a lot of the stories that brought us here,
Mm,
but I don't spend a lot of time remembering the emotional states that I was in when we
mm,
were at the lows. Like the emotions don't normally come back. And so as you asked your question or you made your statement and you put the challenge out, I realized, oh, wait a second, I'm very familiar with
mm,
what you're talking about. And two stories come to mind. One of them was when we were operating the retail financial centers in North Carolina. We had five of them, and I had a manager that we'd hired because she had oodles of experience in running that kind of business. And the idea was that she was going to be our eyes and ears and lead the team and lead the staff. And we found out that she and a number of employees had basically gotten together to steal. I think at the end for that business, it was like 100 grand. It's about $100,000. It took them about 4 months. And when we discovered it and, got people fired and spun up the state bureaus of investigation to go prosecute them, we had a really hard time because it required that I personally, both of us, the two leaders of the business at the time, we each had to work in respective stores, and we were pulling 100 hours a week.
mm.
100 hours a week work week, 6 days a week. We had a contractual obligation to keep the stores open, and we were working with half the staff. And because of what had occurred, we were operating at a capital deficit. We were already losing on the order of like 50 or $60,000 a month, and we had been losing that for a while. And with the theft, it was almost like a knife. It felt like the final knife in the back. And I remember what was so hard was we were working in the stores, so we didn't even have the time to go be strategic. So it's like
Hmm.
not only did we have the absolute crushing responsibility of contractually performing this work, we didn't even have the time to go work on the problem because we were working in the business. And I think the work was so slow that my personal income was like $2 an hour or something like that for 2 years when we did the math. And I don't it was not appropriate to do the math. Not appropriate because then you just feel worse, right? And
Yeah.
and what I remember channeling in that moment was I remember the consensus opinion was we owe our investors $1 million and we will never be able to pay them back. And that was seen as truth. It ended up not being true, but
Right.
that was the cast opinion of the day.
Mm,
I didn't necessarily buy into it, but the people who had been the naysayers
mm,
had their way. And I remember operating at high levels of shame and high levels of self deprecation and doubt and anxiety and anger. I felt like I was supposed to have done so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And what was funny, and I usually will say this, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to us. And I say that with all honesty and sincerity because here's what came next. The ones that stayed, we all were very transparent that whatever work was done, this was the pit fight to claw back to something that looked like profitability. And profitability wasn't a nice number on a spreadsheet. Profitability was effectively knowing that we could pay our rent or find something else to do and declare bankruptcy.
Yeah,
That's how,
minimum cash flow here.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was accounting got tactical. You know, a lot of people think about accounting and bookkeeping as being this conceptual, ethereal activity.
Right.
Um,
So many businesses, in fact, run without hardly ever doing any. Right.
right. Well, in our world, every penny counted, and everyone that was left on the team basically had to come to the party. And I'll tell you what I personally did. Um, After I went through and simply accepted that I was feeling terrible, I realized I had to decide, and this is where I don't know that you lead through hopelessness. I think what happens is hopelessness surrounds you. You get dropped into a vat of hopelessness and you have choices. And those choices include continue swimming in the vat of hopelessness or find something to focus on. Something. And
Mm.
I realized that the exercise of the day became managing my focus. And sometimes it was, okay, how do I get to Friday? Because I don't have the capacity or the stamina for vision beyond next week because it's through Friday. And one of the things that was really heartening is the folks that stayed felt righteously indignant about what happened. They were angry
Mm.
about what happened and what their colleagues did. And we all got together. There were 4 employees that remained of the 10 that were in the company at the time. And we got together, we met, we had a real conversation about what needed to happen. Of the 5 stores, we realized that we did not have what it took to keep all 5 open the whole time. So we let one go to partial hours, and that store never recovered. But the other 4 would get the full brunt of everything we needed to do and everything we needed to execute in excellence. And the employees that were there, looked to me to make next week possible. And we decided from a place of strength that we were going to revive, we were going to survive, we were going to overcome this. And
Mm.
we decided as a team that it was possible to get out of this. And if it were possible to get out of it, we would find that way. And we made that a resolution and a promise to each other. And I will tell you, I was blown away by the courage and the tenacity and the contribution of my team when everything was now stacked against us.
Mm-hmm.
Except I realized the other part of the idea is all of that was also a perspective. I didn't realize at the time that hopelessness and defeat and doubt was a sustained perspective. And that's all it was. And
Mm.
it could be traded out for other things
Yeah.
at times.
Right.
Please let us not entertain what is it? toxic
Toxic
positivity.
positivity.
No, sir.
Hey,
This
everything is
is
fine. No,
no,
indeed.
no, it is not.
Yeah.
However, there is a path to Friday.
I know it's really bad. I also really know we're gonna make it. We are
And
gonna make it.
making
Well,
it
no,
may
no, you
not be
don't.
to next month. Making it might
Yeah.
just be to Friday because Friday's
Yes.
payroll. And I gotta find I remember sitting on Tuesday night. I had to find $175,000 to have be existing because the MoneyGram was coming from a bank account on Thursday afternoon at noon. That's when they would sweep. And so we had to find a way to make it happen so that the money was in the bank account to be swept,
Yeah.
or you know you, all kinds of calamity would ensue, right?
One of
um
the things that your story just and you said hopelessness is a sustained perspective.
mm,
And what that made me think of is, the time in my company, the Yes Works, that when when we started, it just felt like this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. Our first few clients they just appeared out of nowhere and said yes before we even told them what we could do for them, kind of thing. I was just like, this is going to be so easy.
mm.
And so we got our first few clients, and that gave us a lot of, kind of moxie. And then it just, that was that.
Welcome to the desert.
Yeah. like, like, uh, like it reminds me of the joke, of, um, somebody goes and visits heaven and everybody's sitting on a cloud and playing harps, and then they go and they visit hell and everybody's like, it's a party, it's like rock music and drinks and everything like that, and they let him choose, and he chooses hell. And then, he gets there and they put him in the fire and he's like, what is this? I thought I was coming to rock
To the rock
parties. And
party, right?
and they said, yeah, well, you were a prospect then, now you're a client.
Oh, that's good.
So,
In
it
reverse.
was kind of like that. Like we're getting started, and all the clients were coming out of the woodwork, and then they just
Oh, that's
all
funny.
disappeared.
That's
Everything just dried
funny.
up. And I remember feeling some, my hope lasts. It was
Mm,
like a couple years in, and I just remember feeling very hopeless.
mm,
And like there were a few days I got jack squat done. I was like, I'm not
mm.
even prospecting. Like I come to my desk and I get nothing done. I'm so hopeless that the effort to move my fingers and move the mouse, like, it's just beyond me. And I
Well,
remember saying to myself, where I could hear the thoughts of like, you're done. This is
mm,
done. It's not going
yep.
to work. You're
Hmm.
you're screwed. You're going to have to go find a job. You're not gonna
Hmm.
find a job. And
Hmm.
I remember thinking, well, 2 years ago, you thought this was going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. And look how wrong you were about
Hmm.
that certainty. And it was that thought that jarred me out of my certainty about hopelessness. And we're still here.
Amen. Well, and you make a great point because at the end of the day, what story are you telling? What's the story? And again, I'm not going to pretend that the story should be anything. I don't have that. That's above my pay grade. What I
Yeah.
can tell you is the story can be made to serve. And in our case, what ended up happening is I had to stop resisting
Hmm.
because one of the reasons I this is my personal guess. I'm inviting you to show me where I'm wrong. Uh, I feel like so much about hopelessness lives in the resistance that somehow the story should be different. I think that's a component that's very divisive. Like
Mm.
you
Mhm.
should be more successful. You should have some other outcome. something else should have happened. And that is a huge construct that supports the sustained belief that we're here and nothing's going to get better.
Mm.
And the other side of that is because it should have happened some other way.
Or it should have happened already, right? Yeah.
All right, something else should have happened. And I'll tell you the grace that was available in the retail scenario, the way that we got through it was I just had to accept that I had to operate from here.
Mm.
So I
And
stopped resisting the drive for an hour and a half. I stopped resisting the going into the stores every day because I should be better than this. I'm better educated. Why am I a glorified customer service rep
yeah.
behind a window? And then I humbled myself and said, you know what? In this phase, I'm the shopkeep.
Mm.
That is the role that I am now cast into, and I will play it well. And I started having fun, and I started relaxing in, and people started coming to the store looking for me. They would spend money. I would train. I started to have very avant-garde ideas about how customer service reps could engage customers from a place of honesty and engagement and authenticity. And we created, I think I shared this with you. It was from that space that we created the moment of dignity. It's a it's a 12 to 25-second process that a customer service rep basically stops, breathes, feels the air at the bottom of their diaphragm, listens to the words that the customer says, and says something back that has nothing to do with business.
Mm.
That was what we taught.
Mm.
That turned into 25% a year growth, serving 10 to 12,000 customers a month
Yeah.
in our stores
Wow.
in an industry that was shrinking at 8% a year. And so out of all of this came wild success that was inspired from who we were, to the point where I remember, and I'll tell you the story, and maybe I told you too, maybe I haven't. I remember the last night I worked at the stores, a man came in and he came to the counter and he was trying to cash a check or something. And I remember he was just talking to me and I just listened. And he told me his life story and he told me about his wanting to go to this story was told maybe 15 years ago and I remember the details. He was going to the Navy, he had a lady in the car with him, and he was not sure if she would want him because he'd already had a failed relationship with another baby mama and blah blah blah. And I just listened to him. And he must have talked, the store is very slow that day, he must have talked for a good 20-25 minutes straight. And when he was done, I looked at him and I said, isn't it beautiful? Because he was about to ship off and go leave, and he was worried if she would stay with him or whatever. And I said to him, isn't it wonderful that we get to have nightmares in nice, warm beds? Because that was what was appropriate to say in that moment. Whatever was, that was what I was
Wow.
inspired to say. And the
Yeah.
guy broke down in tears
Mm.
because it's what he needed to hear. And he reached underneath the bulletproof glass. You're not supposed to do that, but he did. And I held his hands.
Mm.
I held his hands, and he held my hands, and he looked into my eyes and he cried. And then he left. And that was my last day in the store. And I realized at that moment I had given up every resistance that I had had to the situation that we were in,
Mm.
and I had ceded. And what was funny is that that was my last night in the stores because we were starting to make money to the point where I didn't need to be there anymore and I could go back to being the boss. But anytime I worked in the stores, I was always a trainee because it was dangerous for me to be known as the owner.
Mm.
So
Mm.
from all of that, I tell you, hopelessness is the motivation. If it's here, it's a gift. It's a gift. You get to sit in it. You get to learn about yourself. You get to learn about the low. You get to learn about how you operate when things aren't kosher, when things aren't at their best. And you get to forge something that looks like character.
It looks like character.
Mm.
Uh, There are a bunch of things that come up for me as you're talking. One is, you know, you're telling a story of having made a choice as a team. We are determined.
Hmm.
Determination is a choice that feels, I think, like it has to come from hope, and it doesn't.
Can come from
You
straight up
can
survival.
you can just get well, and I think survival even is a choice. You said at one point, because
Mm.
this is who we are,
Mm.
right? And you just
Amen.
like hope or no hope. This is who we are. And it makes me think of, stories like the captain who goes down with the ship. It's like this is who I am. Or people who, I think about my accountant. My accountant, I learned very recently, just died of brain cancer. And I had no idea that he had brain cancer. He clearly knew, had known for years that he had been battling it for years. And he continued on accounting
Mm.
because that's what he does. That's what he does, is who he is. And by the way, really remarkable human of an accountant, you know.
Mm.
Like he's my accountant not necessarily because I counted on his being a better counter than other people. I simply appreciated the care that he provided.
Mm.
He was truly a servant.
Yeah.
And I think about one of the things they teach at Landmark Education, controversial organization with some very, very wise things that they teach. And they make a distinction, and the words don't matter. They make a distinction between choose and decide.
Mm.
And the way they put it is something like a decision is something you make a decision because of the considerations. And they say with when you make a choice, you look at the considerations, and it's just a matter of sequence. Then
Mm.
you make your choice, not necessarily because of the considerations. They simply are part of, I don't know, part of your environment. And so when you said we did this because this is who we are, that strikes me as it's a very present way to pick an option. This is who we are rather than the future looks bleak or the future looks hopeful, which both of which are illusions, but neither of which can we really predict.
Well, you're reminding me of something I've not channeled back in so long, but thank you for this. I appreciate the adventures in romance and trauma. The thing I was going to share with you was there is something I would say that is harking to what you're mentioning, and I remember back in those days I would say, as long as I draw breath.
Mm,
And so the idea is, I wrote a poem once that used to talk about the the burden of hope, the burden of hope,
mm,
where the idea is that hopelessness is the opposite of hope. So hopelessness somehow robs you of your capacity to have vision. But you know what? Vision sometimes doesn't isn't the right tool in the
mm,
tool shed. It's not the right tool for the job. And so one of the things that I realized, if you don't have access to vision because everything is falling apart, and you don't have access to that which looks like hope because hope is toxic at times, because it may rob you of the capacity to make realistic decisions. And I don't use that word very often, but we'll entertain profanity today. Um, what I remember saying is, as long as I draw breath, I can take another step.
mm,
I remember that being a personal mantra that would come up when it was time and nothing was working. The bank accounts were all on red, credit was completely destroyed. Investor had I had an $80,000 burn on the month, and my last investor only had $40,000 for me. Like, it was super bleak. And I just remember thinking, I have another breath. I can take whatever this action is.
Right. I mean, one of the things I think we're talking about we're shortening and shortening the time horizon.
Yes.
Right. It's like hope is usually about next month, next year, next decade. Right. You've talked to me about 50 years from now,
Yes.
the work that I'll be doing with your team.
Yes.
That is born, I think, of hope and vision. Right.
Yes.
Um, Getting to Friday, that's a much shorter time horizon.
Yes.
Um, and getting to, okay, I'm still breathing, so I've
Yes.
got one more step to take. That
Yes.
is right friggin' now.
As long
Really
as I can draw
incredibly short
breath.
time horizon.
Yes, sir.
And I think about, okay, well, if we are to, and I've had thoughts like this as a leader, if we are to resurrect hope,
Mm.
then the first thing to do is to get to the end of today in the best position we can.
And I'll even tell you, get to 5 o'clock.
That's right. Or get through
Or
this
an
next step.
hour, or this next 15 minutes, or
Right.
this next meeting with this person, right?
Right.
And what I'll tell you is we became very present because every interaction mattered, like our business depended on it,
Yeah.
because every interaction mattered because our business depended on it.
And now what I'm thinking, and it gives me I like almost want to get off the call and go do other stuff, right? Because
Mhm.
it's that powerful. And it reminds me, and you can get into this if you want. It reminds me of how you learned to speed read.
Okay, sure.
Imagine if I have hope and I'm still thinking I've got to get through this next step in the best position I possibly can, or I've got to get to 5 o'clock in the best position I possibly can. That is not necessarily how I go through my days. I
Sure.
go through my days with hope and often a fair amount of comfort.
Sure.
And that comfort is another thing that makes the sofa tempting, right? Hopelessness can make the sofa tempting, and comfort can make the sofa tempting.
Oh, you're so right. So the currency of my world right now is creativity, ingenuity, and um, breakthrough, right? So those are the things that are a big part of how we are operating in the business right now. And nothing creates complacency like success.
Right. Isn't that
So,
right?
so I remember an exercise. There's a mentor slash friend of mine by the name of Roy Williams. He writes the book, The Wizard of Ads. He has a really cool non-traditional business school in Austin, Texas, called the Wizard Academy.
I remember you telling me
And
about it.
we did an exercise. Well, anyway, so I was going to share a story in which we did an exercise in which he made us do a certain thing, and then he took away our ability to be flexible, and we had to do that thing again, but with more constraint. And
Mm,
what would happen is that the second time we actually do more creatively. And the big lesson, and I'm skipping oodles and oodles of lecture here, is that nothing helps creativity like constraint. So that challenge, that you know me, I am a different kind of perverse. You'll come to me and say, Hugh, my arm is chopped off. Oh my God, I'm crying. My eyes are burning from acid, and I have just lost all the people that love me in my life.
mm.
And I'll shake my hands and go, cool. Now you can get started.
Right. And
Now
I've
it's
I have a
interesting.
friend who no matter what level of bad news you call him with, will say, "Isn't that wonderful?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Uh,
you've had these conversations with me. It's like, all right, now it's interesting. Now you have the requisite motivation. Let's get busy. Now it's
yeah.
time. And it's
Um,
nothing like a little bit of constraint to get the creative juices flowing. Constraint like bankruptcy, constraint like calamity, constraint like theft, treachery, the betrayal. Wonderful ingredients for creativity and
yeah.
inspiration. Do
Cons
not
Constraint like You've got no budget to accomplish this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We, the willing, led by the unknown, have done so much with so little for so long that we can do anything with nothing. That was the prayer at
You've
14
said
years
that
old.
before, I think.
Yes.
That
Yes.
that came off your tongue very, very readily. Uh, I'm going to try something completely new before we continue this conversation and
Sure.
just say, hey, viewer, listener, you've been with us for half an hour at this point. If you've been listening for this long, give this thing a like, give it a subscribe. We'd love to get a couple of kudos. It'll make us hopeful that we're doing something useful. All right. There's one piece of this that was really kind of what made me think about today's topic. And I want to tell a story of my good friend, and I should probably change his name. Well, I'll call him Robin. So a couple of years ago now, Robin called me essentially in tears. His business had been struggling and he was feeling so much. You talked about guilt. He was feeling so much guilt and shame, both. He was feeling both because he was very clear he was not going to be able to pay back his investors. And he was, to hear his story, he was days, not weeks, away from having to close the doors of his tech company.
Sure.
And he just called me. He was like, I don't know that there's anything you can do. Then there sure wasn't anything I could do except mostly listen to him and ask him questions. And I don't remember any of the questions that I asked him. I do remember one of the things he was wrestling with was, what do I tell my team? What do I tell my investors? When do I tell them what? And I don't remember the conversation all that well. I do remember that the next time we spoke, he had, I think that very next day, told his team whatever it was he was telling them, which was essentially to lay out reality without editing, without filters. And he had done that deep in the well of hopelessness. He was hopeless. And he knew, I owe it to them to be transparent. That is who I am, is I owe it to them to be transparent. And it wasn't news to them that they were struggling. And what made that company survive to be acquired a few weeks later was that they had enough hope to carry the day.
Well, and so let's talk about responsible. Let's talk about responsible, non-toxic positivity.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I can't tell you how many times my CFO has walked into my office and said, "This is dumb. We're not going to make it through insert period of time. I don't see any changes coming. What the hell, bro?" And that's the attitude. And I'm grateful that I have a C-suite that can come to me and say that kind of stuff and they don't censor themselves. And I will remind them that we are not employed. We're not employed. And so the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship is not in some airy-fairy dream. However, it is always important to remember, and I know this is going to sound super cheesy, but it is the very fabric of how the universe vibrates into existence. So quantum theory will here again save the day. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. And when I mean, we were in a really, really rough place with this business, the business I run today. and we looked out on the forecasts, and everything seemed to not be going our way. And I also know that we have been working on a number of different projects that have taken years to come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens a lot of times is that the people that are doing the judging, the leaders, and the people doing the counting and the assessment, if you're not careful, you will count things that don't yet need to be counted, and you will leave out things that can emerge. Most small businesses only need 3 or 4 opportunities to materialize just the right way for them to be bought another 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
If they have decent systems, they will be able to survive to go do more productive, pivot, whatever needs to happen such
Yeah.
that value is created in the marketplace.
Well, the cool thing about this breath and this step is that it has every possibility of buying you one more
Step. And sometimes
and maybe
one more
two.
is what you need, and
Right.
2 or 3 or
Yeah.
20 or
Right.
20, right?
You know, one of the things I'm going to push back on you on the idea that anything is possible.
Okay, do it.
Because I don't think it is possible that when I walk out the door after we're through with this conversation, that gravity is going to reverse and I'm suddenly going to be standing on the ceiling.
Matter of perspective, but I will let you keep talking.
That said, what I do think is true is we never know what's coming.
Okay,
Right?
we can
There's the
agree on that.
concept of the black swan. And people talked about the black swan. That's the talk about the thing that's impossible. Right? It's like, oh, that's a black swan means there's no such thing.
Well, I wouldn't say. I would tell you from a probabilistic universe, the idea is that
Well,
the
hang
probability is very
on.
low.
I'm
Keep
talking
going.
about what the concept of black swan used to mean.
Okay.
It was an idiom that people would say that is a black swan, and what they meant was that doesn't exist. There's no such
Effectively
thing.
impossible is what you're saying.
Swans are white.
Got it.
And then some explorer went somewhere and look at that, there's a black swan. And so
Okay.
what black swan as an idiom now means is it's the thing that you cannot anticipate and that when it arrives changes everything.
And normally the black swan event is considered negative. And so what I'll tell you is for all the black swans out there, there are what we call step change events. So in my business career, you find a process, you latch on to doing whatever it is you do. And if you can hold on long enough, competition's coming for you, age is coming for you, an aging team is coming for you, technology changes is coming, market changes are coming for you, taxation, they may change a lot. I remember I woke up one day and the business that I had, a law had just passed in the North Carolina Senate and had passed it to the House of Representatives, and the law changed the thing that got us paid. So our business became illegal overnight. That happened. That really happened.
Right. Yeah, that's a really unfortunate black swan.
So all of that can happen. And at the same time, if you stay consistent, creating value, finding humility, serving to the best of your capacity, your employees, your customers, your investors, all the people that you get to create value for, there are also step change events, things that occur that cause your business to level change, step up, if you're willing to see it and operate from a place of, all right, it's here now, let's go. This is what we've been waiting for.
I know.
And you just have to stay open.
Right. You have really enjoyed in the past. There's a quote from Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator, who wrote "Never Split the Difference," that I love. That I believe when the first time I told you about it, excited you very much.
I loved it.
He says, "Never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better instead." And I'm just remembering that philosophy is why he named his company the Black Swan Group.
That makes sense.
So I want to come back to Robin's story, because what got him through was essentially borrowing their hope. They had hope, and that's what carried the day. And so, what I think one of the characteristics that I think of as representing great leadership is resourcefulness. And we think of the capabilities of the people on our team, the technical capabilities of the people on our team. That's a resource. The money in the bank is a resource. The clients that we have, our pipeline, all that stuff is resource. And so is the hope that our teams have.
Now you've touched on something even more impassioning for me. One of the most liberating realizations I've ever had, 25 years of trying my hand at all sorts of stuff, is recognizing that if you're willing to not covet or own anything, like be possessed by anything, you can influence everything. Here's what I mean. So like you talked about where your assets are. In my most desperate places where I have failed, I've become aware of the fact that chances are I was not properly accounting for or utilizing my assets. And what are my assets? I've come to appreciate there are people who are not in my organization that sell us all day long. There are, I think I shared with you the other day, we've gotten several requests. There's a very particular scope. There's a particular legacy system called Sage 50. And we have always gotten requests for, not always, in the last 2 years, we've gotten 6 requests for a particular scope called a sub-ledger migration. That sub-ledger migration scope is beyond our technical capabilities currently in all the parts. Once we have the reports we need, we can do the thing we normally do, but we can't get at the thing that will get us the success. And we didn't know anyone who could get us what we needed until we found out that our number one competitor has a technology to at least get the reports that we need. So we got a deal finally that asked for that. And we said, look, we don't know how to do this part that you say you want, but our competitor does. And they said, well, we want to work with you. We don't want to work with your competitor. So we said, okay. So we called up our competitors and we're like, hey, we got this deal. You do this other part way better than we do. Can you sub for us and let us do our process on top of your result? And they're like, sure, let's do it. So now they're a supplier. So now my competitor is a supplier and we're doing business together to serve a customer.
Right on.
Why? Because I have access to the entire world of resources. And if there is a problem and a person that I get to serve, and I understand clearly that my responsibility is to be in service and to be the place where the idea expresses itself. I am the vessel through which the idea expresses itself. I don't get nervous talking to people because I am not here to represent myself. I am here to present, to have the virtual concepts of whatever supports their solution come through me. And if I'm here in service, I will assemble whomever needs to work together, whether friend or foe. We are all sharing the planet and we all only have each other. The rest of it is a spaceship covered by a thin sheet of oxygen hurtling in the death vacuum of space. And all we have is each other. So let's get this done while we can, because we only have 85 summers left.
And I think that brings us back to kind of your recontextualizing your competitor, brings us back to something you said really early on in our conversation about hopelessness being a persistent perspective.
Sustained perspective. Yes, sir.
I was right, and because you took a look at the world again and saw you recontextualized your competitor in a way that made your competitor a sudden asset. And so that is talk about your cure for hopelessness is to find the assets that may have seemed like hindrances or that you hadn't thought about before. I was listening yesterday to a podcast with an entrepreneur whose name I can't remember, married to the Sarah Blakely of Spanx fame,
Okay.
has sold a couple of $100 million plus businesses, has lost count of how many $1 million businesses he's sold.
Mm.
So really successful kind of dude. And one of his companies, I think, was like a coconut water or something like that kind of business. Direct competitor of Coca-Cola, which I think is owns Gatorade. And Gatorade was sponsoring, I think it was the New York Marathon, right?
Okay.
And they just instead of saying, "Well, we can't get any publicity then at the New York Marathon," he and six other people or five other people became a six pack. They put on these big inflatable costumes of their product and they ran the friggin' marathon. Who gets more publicity, Gatorade or them? Friggin' amazing. That kind of resourcefulness,
Yeah.
just when you say anything is possible, and I go, well, I don't know, like so
Well,
much,
no, no,
certainly
no.
so
What
much
what
more is
what I'll
possible
tell you
than we think
is
is possible.
you hit it on the head. You hit the nail on the head, and I think you said it in a way that is more palatable. Uh, in that you don't know what can come next. I
We
like that
have no
so much
idea.
better. And so, what are you open to happening in the next
Yeah.
breath?
Mm.
And what are you open to happening? And really, it's not even what's possible, it's being open to what's actually probable or even remotely likely. Because possibility is nonsense, but probability is very helpful. And most people don't even appreciate what's potentially probable in their world.
Next week, I'm going to be working with 60 or so executives on how do you cultivate an innovation and problem solving culture. And we have our model, right? Everybody's got their models. We've got 5 P's that of cultivating an innovation and problem solving culture. And one of the P's we call the Pete Carroll principle. Pete Carroll, famous football coach of the Seattle Seahawks until recently.
Mm.
And the question that he always asks is, how do we win from here?
Mm.
And sometimes that requires changing the definition of winning, right? Like speaking of what's possible. If there's 30 seconds left in the game and you're down by 21 points, you're not going to win the game. What is redefining, you might redefine winning.
Sure.
And what that principle suggests when we're working with these executives is that you adopt the posture that this problem can be solved. You don't have to believe it, right? I love the question because I don't when I argue with my ego, it doesn't come out very well, right? It's kind of an egoic practice all by itself, and it's ego, I think, that says, yeah, can't solve this problem. I love the yes and of, okay, fine, can't solve this problem. If you could solve it,
Yeah.
how would you do it?
That sounds like my 6-year-old pretend question. I don't know
Totally.
how to do this, but if you could pretend to be someone who know, what would you do if you could
Yeah,
pretend to be somebody who knew?
it's
What I love,
exactly the same.
well, and as you said, I realize what my brain does is, okay, I begin to reframe what this game is. How do we win
Mm.
from here? Is it this game? Is it every other game that now comes up? Because now we have a bunch of lessons. Um, we have spent the last 12 years getting our butts kicked by like 2,600 different migrations for different companies coming through. And though we are now at the top of our game in our particular industry, we are a household name. It's interesting to me that there is still a thirst to get so much better. We have exhaustive meetings
Mm.
that explore how do we get better, because this problem happened and that problem happened and this is not acceptable. There are ways to make this simpler. We want to make this place easier to work. We want to make all these things faster. Customers are pressing us for faster times and higher throughputs, and we want to basically get the process to be cheaper so that more people can say yes, and we can make it accessible to more and more people. All of these things are still on our mind after a decade of doing this, and the opportunities are more abundant now to take on ourselves, to improve our training, to make it faster. It took
But
six
Hugh, there's no
years.
hope that you're going to get faster.
Well, you know what's amazing? We may not get faster, but the exercise of exploring it and challenging ourselves,
Yes.
that stuff is the stuff of dreams.
Right.
It's
Keeps
just
you
the
fresh,
exercise.
alive, engaged, if nothing
Yes.
else.
Exactly. Until the next huge calamity takes us and completely changes everything. And we have to look at ourselves and wonder why the hell we did this to begin with and over such morons. And then 5 minutes later, you find out that that calamity is the best thing that ever happened because it sets you up for the next skyrocketing event. I'll share this part with you. So we had a pretty gnarly lawsuit when our business got started. It was actually started in arguably one of the worst things that could have happened for me personally as a business owner. And the business was started under this huge yoke where we were fledgling, but also having to deal with these legal fees. So we couldn't afford an office. We couldn't afford a staff that was centrally located. So everybody had to be on their own laptops, and we had to do this via Zoom. And so we did that for the first 5 years. And then COVID hit. And when all of our large competitors slash colleagues out there were trying to figure out how to operate in a world in which there was remote work, it was Tuesday for us and we got busy.
Right on.
And so between 2020 and 2021, we did more business in those 2 years than we had done the previous three. And we were ready. We were ready, but what we thought was a calamity that caused us to be a certain way, we were shot out of a cannon.
Yeah.
When the
Gave
situation
you
was right.
just the capacity that everybody else didn't have when the time
Yes.
came.
And it
All
made the
right.
difference that made the difference.
Need to wrap it up here. This has been a fun conversation for me. In case you haven't been here before, folks, this is Leadership Uncertain, where we are having adventures in confusion, power, love, and dignity. Thanks for joining us for the ride.